Okay, we're just about done with the camera tracker itself. All we have left to do is export our solve into something we can actually use inside of Nuke. Because right now it's really just stored all in this camera tracker node. So there's a variety of different things, ways we can actually export our solve, and that's all done through here under export. So you can see there are a variety of options. Ones that really don't have anything to do with what we're going to be doing today would be things like camera rig, camera set, as well as cards. But we'll talk about these other ones. So camera is fairly straightforward. It's going to export out the camera. Now if I go ahead and click create and leave link output on, you'll see it just outputs the camera. Oops, grab it right there. And if we look in 3D space over here and kind of double click the camera, you'll see it actually pops up for us there. You can even see the camera's path. And you could see what this solve has been doing all along. Now you'll notice that there's this green line that's connecting the camera to the camera tracker, and there's a little arrow on it. This is also a line we can't disconnect. What's happening is it's actually taking the camera data live from the camera tracker right now. That happened because under the camera tracker here, link output was turned on. So it's kind of permanently linked up to this camera tracker. If we wanted to kind of bake all the data into keyframes into the camera, we could keep this link output off, and that is what we're going to do for our final output. However, let's take a quick look to see how this camera actually looks and works. Kind of let us almost preview our solve, if we will. So I'm going to go over here to my window, make a little bit more space, and I want to go ahead and look through my camera. So over here under the default, I'm going to choose camera. I'll also click over here to get the proper film gate, and I'll go ahead and hit play, and you can see that it looks correct. I mean, the grid's kind of throwing it off a little bit, but if I go ahead and stop and hide my grid, you can see it actually does look like the face is actually moving in 3D space. So I would say the solve is looking pretty good so far. Now, it isn't really just the camera though that I want to export. I do actually want to take out a little bit more data than that. I'm going to go ahead and delete the camera. So we'll come back over here. So the next options would be putting out the scene or the scene plus, as well as point cloud, distortion, and undistortion. Distortion and undistortion we don't really need. They're basically going to put out either distorted lens footage or undistorted lens footage. So for example, if I do undistortion, create, you can see there's a lens distortion node that it put out. That would be removing the lens distortion from this footage. However, you'll notice it's set to 0 because we never actually did any lens distortion. We left it at no lens distortion here. So we're really not going to need these either. They're not really going to apply to what we're doing. So that leaves us with scene, scene plus, and point cloud. Point cloud is going to export out pretty much just this point cloud over here. Can I zoom in on it right there? It's just going to export this out as a point cloud node. I'll go ahead and hit create there. And you can see it's just exported that node for us. So we also don't really need that separately. I'd kind of like all of this stuff together. So what I could do is put out a scene. When I put out a scene, it's going to give me several of the nodes that I actually want. It gives me the point cloud, it gives me the camera, and it even connects it to a 3D scene node, which is going to help us out because it's much easier when everything is connected to a scene node. We can view it all at once. However, if we want, and this is not necessary at all, we can even put out a more complex version of this. We can put out a scene plus. What a scene plus is going to put out over here is a lens distortion as well, which we don't really need, but it's there for us. You can see it's all off anyway. It also is putting out the same point cloud and camera as well as scene node, but in addition to that, it's actually hooked up a scanline render for us. If I view the scanline render and go into a 2D view over here, you can see it's actually composited those points on top of the original footage. And you can kind of almost preview how the solve looks. Maybe to make it a little bit easier to see, we might want to shrink down these points over here. So I'm selecting the point cloud, coming to point size. It looks like it's stuck there. I'm giving it just a moment to catch up. It's probably doing an autosave. So let that just kind of, there we go, catch up. Put this down to 2. And you can see those are a little smaller and easier to see now. And we could even, if we'd like, disable this green channel and this color correct and we can see them on top of the raw original footage. So it's a little bit slow because it has to actually render these points out, but it's really a great way to check if the points are actually sticking to the face. So what I'm going to do is let this kind of buffer, and I'll pause while I do that. So I'll go ahead and pause. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we're done, and it actually looks like it's sticking really well. If you notice points that are sliding around that really just don't seem to make much sense, that's obviously an issue. I see a few points, for example, this one down here that doesn't really belong anywhere, but for the most part, the other points seem to make sense. Some of them are a bit further out, it's away from the ear, but you can see it is actually moving with it. You can also see that it's actually colored the points that were our manual tracks black, and that's because they were all over those kind of darker areas, so it may have just kind of naturally pulled that color. But overall, I think we have a pretty good result here. So we're going to go ahead and end this module here, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we've covered. So in this module, we've actually covered several different things. The first thing was creating an initial camera solve. That was us taking our automatic tracks as well as our manual tracks, combining them together and allowing it to actually produce that first solve. We then took a look at removing some of the problem tracks manually. That was when we were actually trying to select them in the 2D view, match them to the 3D view, and obviously delete them. After that, we took a look at removing problem tracks automatically. That was when we used several different features that included our track length, our track error, and our max track error. We started bringing those down, or in the case of the track length, bringing them up, in order to start getting rid of the tracks that really just were not providing anything useful, and ended up bringing our error level down pretty significantly. We also took a look at moving the solve over to the origin using that trick where we selected one point and setting that to the ground. We also took a look at adjusting the orientation of the solve as well as the whole scale of the solve to bring it up in size. And we finished off with looking at multiple methods of exporting the solve out of that camera tracker. So that ends this module, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.